Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and I'm joined with David Kirkpatrick. How you doing?
Doing good. You?
Doing good. It's a good Kentucky day, right? And we're going to talk some more Kentucky history.
I'm ready.
We hope everybody has been enjoying the discussion about Benjamin Logan, because we're going to continue it today. And we're talking before, we've already done 3 episodes. It could be 4, it could be 5. We're just going to go until we get done. And if you want to listen to it, we appreciate it.
That's right. Well, Logan's one of those guys that's hard to fit all in. I mean, I don't know what the secret is, eating your Wheaties in the morning or something, but man, this guy accomplishes a lot.
That's true. It's true. And which we're reading the Logan biography, which again, we mentioned this on the first episode. There's not a lot of biographies out there. There's a lot of information out there. I guess if you're looking for it, you can definitely find a lot about Logan. But a full-on biography, this is the only one that I know of by Talbot, and it's a good one. It's a good one if I was to rank it in biographies.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And again, it's a hard book to come by, but if you check your libraries, you can get it on library loan or something like that pretty easily. And read it yourself, or you can just listen to the podcast, and we're basically telling you the story of Benjamin Logan anyway. So anything before we get started that you want to mention, recap, anything like that?
I think we're ready to delve into it. Where we left off was right in the heat of the rough period in Kentucky. We talked about the Bloody Sevens and everything that those original settlers have gone through. And if it hadn't been for, Logan, there'd only be 2 settlements in Kentucky at the time. So they are on the edge of something very dangerous.
That's very true. That's a good way to kind of talk about, I guess, the way to look at Benjamin Logan. You have the journey to Kentucky, the setting up of Logan Station, and those first few years of just like I said, the dark and bloody ground, what some people call it, the Bloody Sevens, just this rough period. And then you kind of move on into this pre-statehood period where things are kind of calming down and so forth. And then you got the post-statehood kind of, and that's kind of a good way to kind of think about Benjamin Logan's life, I guess, is in a way. And we're kind of in the middle between things are still pretty rough, and maybe by the end of this episode we might be to the point where things are getting a little better. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. So we're at this point like 1778, 1779, and Logan Station is complete, and there's a Native American attacks quite a bit, but what we could call Bowman's expedition is what's taking place. Some interesting parts here. The Native Americans are continuing to attack, but the frontiersmen are basically there trying to take care of their family. Any surplus supplies that they have, they're giving it to the state, and not necessarily the state of Kentucky because it's not formed, but the state of Virginia. And now, not to say as well, none of this supplies is going to Williamsburg at the time.
Right.
It's still staying in Kentucky, but it's to basically the defense of Kentucky. Soldiers have portions and so forth that they can contribute and so forth. Benjamin Logan was marked down as one of the largest providers of provisions in 1778, which is pretty interesting. Which I would say as well. We'll talk about this a little bit more. He has a lot of land. He's gathering up quite a bit. He did pretty good with his ledgers, but or on the ledgers, it shows that he provided the most, but it also shows that his name is marked out. So that could be the fact that he didn't charge the state for his provisions; he just willingly gave them, which kind of serves his character. He from the beginning is definitely, I feel like, a founder of Kentucky because he was there to make it a state. Also, whenever he got there, a wedding took place at Benjamin Logan's house. So, when I was reading the book, it's pretty funny because there's this whole story about this single lady shows up, it is a family, and it's kind of interesting how quickly the suitors show up to say, hey, I'm out here on the frontier alone. I'll take a wife. I want to start a family. But just kind of it was kind of interesting. It had a whole list of all these suitors pursuing this lady, and eventually she was married though.
No one stayed single for very long on the frontier. So
no. And again, as all this stuff is going on, the population is increasing. More stations are being built. William Whitley actually moves out of Fort Logan's Fort and builds his own station. Sometimes when you look at maps, you can see Whitley's station is marked down, and I assume that's where he kind of went and stayed while they were building his house.
right.
So, but as it goes, more families come. Some families leave. More families come into the stations until they can make their way. So that's kind of what's going on in this time period, I guess, at Logan's Fort.
Yeah, and even though they're still in the middle of the Revolution, as you said earlier, things are calming down a little bit. And one of the main things in February of 1779, Henry Hamilton, who is leading British troops, is captured by George Rogers Clark, and they arrive at Logan's Fort with some of those prisoners. And that's a huge relief for the settlers because the conflict in the West had largely hinged on Hamilton. And so fortunately for us, he provides a gift to America without realizing it. He describes the fort. So we have his description. So he calls it an oblong structure formed by houses that kind of make up two streets at the angles, and they were stockaded. And it's surrounded by wooded hills. It kind of paints a romantic picture of it. There's a stream of water that passes by, which turns a small grist mill. So you really see how much Logan has developed this place in a very short period of time. And so he gives heaps of praise on the environment. He's a little less kind to the people there because, according to him, they're a little less kind to him. But you can kind of understand that. This is the guy that's been causing you all this trouble. He said they were not exceedingly well disposed to the British prisoners, especially the women, who apparently had an earful to share. So, but they're there for a while. So we can kind of get a picture of what's happening here. And so Captain Logan and his wife, she had a brother rather who'd been carried off by Indians, and they at least were very hospitable and very civil, he said. So you get kind of the gentlemanly code of conduct to some degree. Once a person is surrendered, things change a little bit. So he's only there until April 20th, and then he moves on. But there's still a lot happening. Bowman's expedition is organized in May. Logan and his brother lead their men to join Bowman. And basically, there are still a number of Indian villages, still a number of hot spots that could be launching off points into Kentucky. So they end up targeting Chillicothe, which, from the very beginning is sort of a Native American center of power and trade. That's the area where, when Boone's daughter's kidnapped, when Jemima is soaking her foot in the Kentucky River and they kidnap her, that's where they think they're going. So this is kind of a headquarters. And they get to a log house, and they're just not able to to quite penetrate it and get into it, and they end up withdrawing. So, the expedition gets different reviews. Bowman justifies the retreat, saying that the enemy was in a strong position. He's probably not wrong in that. But they did raid the village, and Herod and several other people were there as well. So it's not to say that the conflict is over, but maybe entering a new phase, because we're starting to see more of these battles that are taking place outside of Kentucky, where Kentuckians are on the move to meet the enemy somewhere else. So,
yeah, and I think it's so interesting whenever you're talking about Henry Hamilton, and like I said, the fact that he stayed there gives the documentation of what the fort looked like. And like it's so crazy to think a prisoner of war was the one who is a primary source for Logan's Fort, and
right.
that's what people rely on, and so forth. And of course, too, the people of the time. It's interesting to say, well, it was nice. Some of the people weren't too nice, but the captain was good. So it's a pretty good connection to think that he went his way through there. But yeah, and the whole Bowman's expedition. You can get into that, and that it really has nothing to do with Logan per se.
Right.
He was just one of the people there, who led a brigade of, or some led troops. As we're going to get into here, he gets some promotions. He gets moves up in the military rank. So, but in October 13, 1779, land claims get held by the Virginia Commission, and if anybody who is a student of early Kentucky frontiersmen from 1770 to 1820, maybe, land claims are a massive issue, and this is pretty much the beginning of those problems.
Absolutely.
Loads of settlers have been coming over to the area, and many of these settlers had families that had connections to Logan. Even the Virginia Assembly basically encouraged current and new settlers with a 400-acre land grant. Let's go get that land. Kind of a land rush, to say, not so much as you think of in the 1800s, but in a way, that's what happened. There was kind of some stipulations. It wasn't a full-on first come first served land grab. There had to be improvements. They had to be made to the land. Any house or hut, and now a hut was considered an improvement, but
Right.
a hut could also be a stack of poles leaning against something. So that's probably not the best stipulations to give to a bunch of people who want a bunch of free land. I could go easily and lay some sticks or poles against a tree and be like, "Oh, this is my hut," all over 400 acres or so, and be like, "Oh, I could see where
If
some
you,
problems would come."
if you could crawl under it and stay dry, you met the
Yeah,
standard.
yeah, yeah. But Benjamin Logan, of course, used this new proposal to claim land for his brothers and others. James Knox had a claim for 1,400 acres, uh, which is a lot to claim. But it worked out for a lot of people. The commission moved from like station to station, and these hungry kind of land claimers would just follow the court around to make their claims. But James Knox, that's one person that we've had some listeners that have chimed in and want to know a lot more about. So he's another one we might want to get into.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know as much about him, but a frontiersman nonetheless. So
yeah.
um,
There's a book called Virginia's Western War that covers him a little bit, and I need to dig that back out and kind of dust it off. But yeah, an interesting character in there from the beginning.
mhm.
And yeah, you're right about the land, and it's interesting because I always, in my mind, you try to attach a person to one piece of land or one place, but really some of these frontiersmen had settlements or warrants, preemption warrants, or settlement grants across the state. So at Harrisburg, for example, Logan claims about 1,400 acres on the Dix River. So that's in the east side of what's now Mercer County. He's doing that for his brother-in-law, Samuel Briggs, but still, the fact that he's able to file it, is proof of how these guys went after this. And to his credit, he's successful in all of his claims except the claim for Benjamin Briggs, who was still a minor. And these guys went out and you kind of surveyed things yourself and staked things off. So there was constant overlapping and shingling of these grants, and people were trying to settle it. So that really speaks highly of Logan and his ability, because it doesn't work out so well for Boone, who people often think of as the quintessential frontiersman. And so, um, but
And then it is interesting though to say that the only one he didn't get was the minor. But I mean that's another thing to say. There people were claiming so much land or trying to claim all this land. Even the minor, which I guess would the minor have been under 16 at that time, or would that, or was
for
it
something
18?
for something
Was
like a
it
land
18?
grant, I bet it's 21. As odd as that
Oh,
sounds.
21. Okay, well, that's a bit more. Yeah, I understand that. But well, this minor doesn't need any land.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, it's amazing. And then once you've got the land, you've got to take care of it. And one thing they're having to contend with is not just attacks from natives, but also the weather. 79 to 80 is one of the coldest winters of that era. And with population on the increase, that's helpful. You've got more people out there to chop wood and do that sort of thing, but you also have people who are eating through your food supplies. And so, starvation is a real threat, whether you're living in a station or you're elbow to elbow in a fort. So, that's something they've got to contend with. Logan, of course, is captain of the militia at that point at St. Asaph's, about 100 men or so. And, some men end up deserting because Logan and James Knox, are pretty strict disciplinarians. But you have to be on the frontier. You either do things right or you die. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes people, even back then, had this idea of Kentucky being wild and free. And they found out quickly once they got here that you got to work with the folks that are here or you're not going to make it. But despite those few hiccups, the number of men increases. Logan's promoted to colonel. And eventually Lincoln County is formed in 1780. That's when we get the three big counties. We get Fayette, Jefferson, and of course Lincoln is formed by Virginia. So Kentucky is starting to put down roots, and a lot of that has to do with Logan and his leadership.
Yeah, yeah. And as that kind of progresses, though, and that was the reason. The reason for those, the new counties was for representation to be more local.
Right.
Because at the time it was still Kentucky County, and it just wasn't feasible, but able also to increase the military to have better control over the different stations. And again, the three counties at the time would have been Fayette. So you had Boonesboro, which would have been the seat of that, and then Louisville would have been the seat of Jefferson. I think Harrodsburg would have been the seat of Lincoln at the time, but it switches. I get confused with the dates that it switches. I don't know if it was 78 or it's like 81 or something like that, or it switches to Stanford in a little bit of time there. But either way, the whole point of this is to kind of strengthen the military availability and militia and so forth. And of course, right on the heels of this is a British invasion. The not the Beatles, but it would have been I guess the second British invasion, maybe, was that right? Would have been the second.
There's activity
I
in
don't
the area.
know. Yeah, I don't really know. This might be considered the first one, really, because it's not really
Yeah,
the other ones. The British isn't really behind it. It's more Native Americans
yeah,
than
it's
that.
inspired
So
by the British. Some of the sieges of Boonesboro and Fort Herod, but yeah, there's not a strong British presence.
So as we had said before, the Native Americans had kind of increased their attacks. Fort Logan was not as affected as a lot of those. Like we said, it was farther south. So with Boonesboro and Herod, that they kind of got the brunt of that. But this was a full on, invasion to come. But William Fleming was a guest at Logan's cabin many times, and he while he was there, he actually lost his horses and put in a reward for $30 for their return.
Pretty
Logan
good
retrieved
sum.
them quickly. Yeah, yeah. Logan retrieved them pretty quickly, and he did not. It's unlikely that he accepted the reward because there's been evidence throughout the time that Logan did not accept. Like I said earlier with the uh, giving back of the to the state. Not charging
Yeah.
the state for stuff. But the war was, of course, was in full swing, and while all this was going on, there's massive rumors about a British invasion and so forth. And this brings us to Byrd's invasion, and him and his the Native American allies, British troops, and two cannons, and that's the big thing. Two cannons here. Um, invade Kentucky.
That's
They wanted to go to Louisville first and take on the Falls of the Ohio and kind of take that because they would have took Louisville and that station first. It would have hindered the Mississippi travel,
right.
which is very important. However, the Native Americans, the Shawnee, and again, I'll probably say Shawnee mostly, but it was not just the Shawnee. There was other tribes in there as well. They did not want to go to the Falls of Ohio. One reason I believe is they kind of feared that Clark was there,
Hmm.
and they did not want to mess with Clark. But instead, they decided to go straight into the heart of Kentucky, and that would have been Ruddle Station and Martin Station. They were pretty much taken out quite quickly with the cannon. The people surrendered quickly, but with 350 prisoners, Byrd turned around the invasion and pretty much left. It's probably a really good thing that he did because if he would have kept going, I mean, when you're looking at two cannons versus a fort of just gunmen, it's pretty much one sided. I mean, the
Oh,
cannon
absolutely.
bust open a wall and it's game over.
Right.
And that's what one of the forts. That's what exactly what happened. There's like, oh, they got a cannon, we surrender. You know, um, another one defended themselves at first. Was like, we're not surrendering. And then they shot a hole in the cannon there, or a hole into the fort, and they're like, okay, now we surrender.
That's a convincing
So,
argument you have there.
um, so this all happens. So this all happens, and a um, retaliation campaign is pretty much planned. And Benjamin Logan would be the second in command to George Rogers Clark. Logan ordered the militia captains to select 4/5 of the company to go on this campaign, basically just leaving enough behind to guard and hunt for the people that were remaining uh, in the forts and stations. The group headed quickly to Bryan Station, and then they moved north. During this time, there was a man that went missing, and a small group kind of went to find him, and they only found his horse, but they couldn't find the man. Uh, there's two theories from this: he had been killed, or he had been captured by the Native Americans, or he was actually a loyalist, and he had went to warn the natives that there had been, there was this, um, retaliation invasion going on and so forth, which you don't think about that a lot,
Yeah.
that there could be loyalists in these Kentucky forts, and it's very well possible and reasonable, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
mhm.
And you may not always start out as a loyalist, but maybe you don't feel like the war is going the way you need it to, and people make bad decisions and change sides. And but yeah, you're right. They're on this campaign, and that's in the back of their mind. And as they're gathering at the Licking River, which is going to be the jumping off point for their retaliation, you can really see the work that George Rogers Clark has done. In May of '77, Harrodsburg has 198 people in the fort. That's men, women, children, and everything. By the time they get to this point, Logan has 328 men under his command. So he already has more fighting men under his command than Harrodsburg had in the fort altogether. And by the time they reach where Clark is, there's a total of almost 1,000 men, so like 970 men. So you can really see the militia system is starting to work.
Mm-hmm.
Still some problems with supplies. They're pretty limited, but they cross the Ohio River on August 1st, and they camp in the area of what would become Cincinnati. The Army does split up at that point on its way to Chillicothe. Clark has one group, Logan has the other, again, speaking highly to Logan's ability as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And not only does it allow you to surround the enemy from two sides, but it also, if you're foraging and that kind of thing, it just makes it easier. But they get to the village and they find that their presence has already been known. It's been deserted. And so they razed the buildings and took what food they could before marching a little further north to Piqua. And, they find the village there. Was pretty well suited. It had a swamp and a river and a cliff on the side, so a little more defended than some places. But between them and the village was prairie grass. And so they begin their approach and are immediately fired upon. Clark and his men go around the village and try to cut off the native retreat. They had a 6-pounder cannon with them this time, so they've kind of turned the tables a little bit. And they begin to fire, and of course, each ball splinters the wood. Like you say, it doesn't sound impressive to have a cannon or 2 cannons, but when the only defense is a tree trunk, it makes a huge difference. So, with Ruddles Mill and Martin Station in reverse, now the natives are retreating, and they realize there was no hope of holding out against a cannon. They're not able to really cut off that retreat and capture them. So the enemy does escape, but they had a lot to congratulate themselves for. They'd been on rough terrain and had still managed to destroy the village and something on the order of 800 acres of corn. And that sounds like an odd thing, I think, in modern ears to report. But with these settlements, whether it's an American fort or whether it's a native village, having food stored up for warriors is just as important as having gunpowder. And so it's really it's a military thing that they're doing, but they're with each one of those wins, they're kind of pushing the enemy back farther and making it harder for them to reach into Kentucky.
Yeah, and again, like you said earlier about Logan is second in command of pretty much 1,000 some troops here,
right.
Which goes to show his leadership and so forth. But yeah, the corn and all that stuff, you get a lot of, they're leaving them to starve. Well, it's war. That's
Right.
the plan. Move and in this case, the Native Americans had to kind of move back, and then they would regain that. They do come back to some of these villages or start new villages in the area. But that's kind of the way it goes. And excuse me. So that that's the retaliation, and there'll be one more big invasion. We'll get to that one here in a minute, but that was a pretty big victory for the Kentuckians because, again, it pushes them back. Less attacks happen on the frontier. They don't stop, but it kind of pushes the natives back a little further. So anyway, that pretty much wraps up that little invasion. But here's kind of an interesting story. Oh, before we go on, with the Chillicothe being abandoned, I think that really kind of leads to the thought that one guy, the one soldier, was probably a loyalist and went to war on and so forth, or he was captured and he was just like, "I'll tell you everything, don't kill me."
Yeah.
One of the other ones, something like that happened so that they would get that warning. I would assume. But here's an interesting story: a man who was attacked by the Native Americans was presumed dead. His companion had seen him fall when the shot went off. However, the man had actually tripped over a vine and was captured. So when Benjamin Logan heard this story, he rushed to the man's wife, who was about to be remarried, and the woman called off the wedding and returned to her husband. So that's just an interesting little tidbit of life on the frontier.
Yeah, preventing a very awkward situation.
Yes, tripping on a vine could lose your wife. So make sure you
Sounds like a
make sure
fortune
you go.
cookie somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. But like we said before, November 1st, 1780, Lincoln County, Jefferson, and Fayette counties were finally formed. But the first court was held on January 16th of 1781. Benjamin Logan took the oath of justice of peace, and I really don't know what this title means necessarily. Maybe you do, but it's the Commissioner of Oyer
Hmm.
and Terminer for the Trial of Slaves. Um,
Yes.
do you know
Oyer
what
and
that means?
Terminer,
I don't.
it has a French origin to it, but it's basically an English criminal court. So it's a small version.
Uh-huh.
It's the first criminal court in Kentucky, basically. So before the circuit courts
Okay.
exist, the circuit courts in their modern form come about in 1803. So this is one of those early courts, and basically it's a criminal court.
Yeah. Yeah. But why is it for the trial of slaves? Is that just
There must have
I
been a
don't know.
specific incident because they end up the court exists for a few years and they end up covering other things too. So there must have been a
Mhm.
specific incident that whether it's a slave rebellion or something like that, and they were trying to prosecute it. But
Mhm.
yeah, I guess they called it. They clearly called it into effect for some reason. So there's definitely a story
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, in the February court, Logan, offers land for the county seat to be moved to St. Asaph's, and the court agrees. And so that's where these trials are going to be held from now on, not just Hoyer and Terminer, but any kind of dispute at all, including land disputes. So, things progress. During the April court, it was kind of assumed that Logan and Herod uh, would be given the ranks of major and lieutenant colonel, but neither one was willing to accept those appointments, mainly because that would be taking a demotion. So things kind of continued as they were. They're trying to establish, the basics of governance, and you've got court systems and things going on. But yet again, there was a Native American attack, and that always kind of throws things into chaos. So um, Logan wasn't in the military at the moment, not actively. So anyone could be called upon in the militia, but he was not serving at the moment. So he ends up seeking a seat in the Virginia Assembly, and goes against a man by the name of Jacob Myers. And you kind of feel bad for Myers. I mean, it's not a crowded field, but it's Benjamin Logan. You're not going to win. He's easily defeated, with his reputation of being such a strong leader. So he and others, like Daniel Boone, head to Richmond, and that's Richmond, Virginia. There's no Richmond,
Mhm.
Kentucky yet, because the capital is moving there from Williamsburg. So, they did a little work at the session because the British were also busy on that side of the mountain. They had to move
Probably
twice.
probably a little more busy, I would say.
Yeah, there are a few more of them over there. And actually, they come very close to capturing the Virginia legislator. And of course, everyone knows Paul Revere, who kind of saves some of the leaders of the Revolution in the North. But if you're a good Kentuckian, you know Jack Jewett.
There you
Um,
go.
Virginia helps save the legislator, and especially Thomas Jefferson, who was a number one target for the British, by
Mhm.
warning them that the British were coming and then leading the British astray. So um, while many are, fleeing, running, trying to prevent arrest, Logan's busy carrying a sack full of gold and silver to safety. Part of the Virginia Treasury. So again, uh, it's perfectly logical to think about yourself in a scenario like that, but a strong leader thinks about everybody, and that's what Logan's doing here. And to show it was no idle threat, Daniel Boone does get captured. So
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
it's something worth considering that of how close they really were to disaster.
And just a few tidbits about that. We will be having an episode here, probably a few months, probably more towards November, about Jack Jewett and the Jack Jewett House, which is in Woodford County, which you can go visit. So some more coming up about him. A very interesting Kentuckian for sure. Um, and also the interesting thing about Daniel Boone, we think about, oh, Daniel Boone was captured. Oh man, the British must have been elated to capture Daniel Boone. Guess what? They didn't know who he was. They
Yeah,
didn't know, at that point, Daniel Boone was nobody. It didn't
right.
matter. So he eventually gets released and so forth. But we've talked about Daniel Boone enough. Uh, all this goes on, and um, eventually, eventually Logan comes back to Kentucky, and he becomes the county lieutenant of Lincoln County in July 18th of 1781. So pretty much he's the man in charge, which he pretty much probably was anyway.
Mhm.
I guess if you think of Lincoln County, there was Harrod still in Harrodsburg and so forth. So he does become the main guy in the entire county, um,
Yeah.
which pretty big step military wise and leadership wise too. I guess if you want to go that as well. But Clark, things started getting a little bit more interesting. I guess this is when we're starting to shift that from defense to kind of um, uh, attack mode and so forth. I guess the waves are changing to an extent. Clark calls a meeting of the military leaders to address the Native American threat. Fort Jefferson at this time was pretty much abandoned. The Vincennes fortification was really not real well fortified at all. Logan and Todd, which Todd would have been the lieutenant of Fayette County,
Mm.
wanted to build a fort at the mouth of um, the Kentucky River. However, the other leaders wanted to make an offensive attack. Um, of course, this is now went from military strategy to political debate.
Oh yes.
uh, who knew? Eventually, it is settled that there would not be an offensive attack at the moment. They would hold off, and that the defense of Kentucky would be the priority. Clark actually planned to build a fort at the mouth of Kentucky and garrison it out of the county militiamen. But then Todd and Logan are like, I don't think that would work. That's going to take away from our men at home. Um, so a whole bunch of politicking is going on about these forts, which that's just the way it is.
A
Nothing
proud
new there.
Kentucky tradition.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. There is some debate there about how to prevent what they've gone through for 2 years from happening again, and a number of varying opinions. As you indicated, some of that honestly, and some of that is jockeying for power. But Clark does send troops to be garrisoned at Logan's Fort in December of '81. So um, it started a few issues. Locals get tired of feeding them because they're not bringing supplies like a modern army
Mhm.
would. They have to be fed and garrisoned. People are tired of putting up with them. It's getting crowded. And so Meriwether, the commander of the unit, hears these complaints and just openly refuses to leave. So um, Logan tries to order them out of the fort. It's his fort. He's trying to keep things peaceful and somewhat harmonious. And they say that, well, that's nice, but George Rogers Clark is the head of the militia. And when he tells us to leave, we will. And until then, we will not. So, the food supply stops because people are no longer willing to feed them. Uh, there's some tension. Meriwether says that's fine. They'll just go shoot some cows, from which he'll feed his men. And Logan has to stand up and say, if they shoot the cows, he'll shoot Meriwether, which is a powerful argument for not doing that. But men on both sides at one point start forming lines to fight each other, and word arrives from Clark before any bloodshed can take place. But it really goes to show that the Fess Parker happy-go-lucky, we're all working together. You did that in the heat of the moment, but these are people with different opinions and strong wills, or you wouldn't be in Kentucky. And
Yeah.
sometimes those wills bump into each other.
And it is kind of pretty interesting how that goes. It gets real quick. It gets real heated real quick there whenever people start drawing the lines.
That's right.
But all that, we talked about a little bit there about the political part of it, and of course, all this inaction kind of leads up to um, the next British invasion. You got the siege of Bryan Station, which we've talked about, and the Battle of Blue Licks. So real quickly, we won't get too much into that because we did just do some episodes, a month ago about them. If you want to go back and listen to those, we'll just try to talk about Logan's involvement here, and it's not much because as you've probably listened to those, he didn't get there. So the battle happens, the siege, the another invasion happens. The siege at Bryan Station takes place. The natives and the Shawnee, the British, they all leave Bryan Station after a few days, and then Boone and Todd and a whole bunch of the militiamen get to Bryan Station and say we need to pursue them. Some of them wanted to wait for Logan and so forth, but